My husband's dementia turned him into a stranger who no longer remembered our life together. He accused me of being an intruder and screamed, "Get out of my house." Our children were terrified of him, asking, "Why is Daddy so mean?" I faced the heartbreak of losing him while he was still alive. When he forgot my name for the last time, I realized I had already lost him. I never thought I'd have to defend myself against the man I loved. But there he was, his face twisted with anger, eyes filled with confusion and fear, pointing at me like I was a stranger in our own home. "Get out of my house. I don't know you. Get out." My stomach dropped. My hands trembled. My heart ached so deeply I thought I might collapse right there on the floor. This was the man I had built a life with. The man who had held my hand through childbirth, whispered love into my ear for decades, and promised to stand by me until the very end. And now, he looked at me with nothing but fear and hatred. Our children, Anna and Lucas, stood frozen in the hallway, their faces pale. "Mom, why is Daddy so mean?" Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I had known for a while that something was wrong. The little things at first, forgetting where he put his keys, calling me by the wrong name, getting confused in familiar places. But then it escalated. He started getting angry over things that never used to bother him. He forgot birthdays. He forgot routines. He forgot us. And now, it seemed, he had forgotten me entirely. But I wasn't ready for what came next. Because losing my husband to dementia was only the beginning. The betrayal, I was drowning in grief, barely keeping myself together, when his family swooped in like vultures. His brother, his sister, even his cousin who had never once cared about us before, they all had something to say. And none of it was in my favor. "I don't think she's taking care of him properly. She's probably making things worse. She's just after his money." Money? Was that what they thought of me? That I, the woman who had stood by his side for 30 years, was using him? The worst part? He believed them. He didn't remember our wedding day. He didn't remember the years we spent raising our children. But somehow, he believed every lie they fed him. And they took full advantage of it. They took everything. One day, I got a call from his bank. They wanted to confirm a transfer of $30,000. "What transfer?" I asked, my blood running cold. "The one your husband requested this morning." I rushed to check our accounts. The money, all of it, was gone. His family had convinced him to sign over access to everything. They drained our savings, our investments, even his retirement fund. When I confronted them, they had the audacity to smirk. "You're not his wife anymore," his sister sneered. "He doesn't even remember you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But what could I do? Evicted from my own home a week later, I came home to find the locks changed. They had convinced him to kick me out of my own house. I pounded on the door, shaking with rage and disbelief. He opened it, his face cold, unrecognizing. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "You're trespassing." "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "This is our home. Let me in." His eyes narrowed. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." And he did. I was forcibly removed from my own house that day. The home I had spent decades filling with love and memories. To fight back, I spent the next few weeks sleeping on my daughter's couch, trying to figure out how to fight back. I had no access to our money. No home. No legal standing, because in his mind, I didn't exist. But I refused to let them win. I started digging. I hired a lawyer. And what I found made my blood boil. His family wasn't just taking his money. They were preparing to sell the house and shove him into a low-quality care facility while they pocketed the rest. They didn't care about him. They didn't care about me. They only cared about what they could take. And that was their mistake. Because if they thought I was just going to disappear, they had another thing coming. The war begins. I wasn't going down without a fight. They had stolen my husband from me, first his mind, then his trust, and now our entire life together. But they weren't going to get away with it. I hired the best lawyer I could afford. It wasn't easy. My accounts had been drained, and I was living off what little savings I had managed to keep separate. My daughter, Anna, helped as much as she could, but we were running on fumes. Meanwhile, his family wasted no time enjoying their stolen riches. His sister posted pictures online, new jewelry, new cars, expensive vacations. His brother suddenly had a business opportunity he needed to invest in. And all the while, my husband, the man they pretended to care about, was getting worse. The legal battle, I thought the law would be on my side. After all, I was his wife. I had been taking care of him for years. But dementia is a cruel disease, not just for the person suffering from it, but for the people left behind. Legally, he was still considered competent when he signed over everything to them. The court saw it as his choice. I had to prove coercion, manipulation, exploitation. I started gathering evidence. Bank statements, messages, video footage. Anna and Lucas started recording everything, conversations, phone calls, anything that might show how they were controlling him. And then, Just when I thought we were getting somewhere, they made their next move. They filed a restraining order against me. I'll never forget the moment I was served the papers. I sat in Anna's living room, exhausted, drained, barely holding myself together, when a knock at the door changed everything. A court officer, legal documents in hand. They were accusing me of elder abuse. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Is this a joke? I asked, staring at the papers. But it wasn't. They claimed I was trying to manipulate my husband. That I was harassing him. That I was a threat. And since he couldn't remember the truth, he believed them. I wasn't allowed near him. Not at the house. Not at the doctor's office. Nowhere. The man I had loved for over 30 years, the man I had spent my life building a future with, was now legally protected from me. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. They wanted to erase me completely. The breaking point. A month passed. Then 2. I couldn't see him. I had no updates on his condition. And then one day, Lucas came rushing into the apartment, his face pale. They're moving him. My heart stopped. What? They found a care home. One of the cheap ones. The kind where they just dump people. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I called the lawyer. We needed to stop this. Now. But I was running out of time. I knew exactly what they were doing. They had gotten what they wanted, his money, his house, and now they were done with him. They wanted him locked away and forgotten. And if I didn't do something fast, I would never see him again. A desperate gamble. I had to move fast. I knew exactly how these places worked. The moment they got him inside that care home, he would disappear. His so-called family would keep me out for good, and by the time I could fight my way back in, he'd be too far gone, or worse. I wasn't about to let that happen. So I did something reckless. I followed them. When they packed him up and drove him to the care home, I tailed their car. My hands were sweating against the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think straight. I kept my distance, but I made sure not to lose them. I didn't even know what I was going to do. Beg? Sneak in? Call the cops? But then, something happened that I wasn't expecting. He remembered me. They pulled into the parking lot of a horrible-looking facility. Peeling paint. A broken sign. A couple of tired-looking nurses smoking near the entrance. I watched from my car as his brother and sister got out and opened the door to help him out. And then, he hesitated. I saw him look around. His face, which had been blank for months, suddenly twisted with fear. He started shaking his head. No. I don't want to be here. His sister grabbed his arm. Come on, it's okay. Where's my wife? I swear my breath caught in my throat. His brother laughed, a mean, sharp sound. You don't have a wife, man. Come on, let's go inside. But my husband, fought back. He yanked his arm away. His voice got louder. Where is she? I want to see my wife. I didn't think. I just moved. I threw open my car door and ran toward him. His family turned, their faces filled with shock, but I didn't care. I grabbed his hands. I'm right here. He looked at me, his eyes wild, his breathing uneven. And then, for the first time in months, he recognized me. You, he whispered. You're my wife. The fight at the care home. His sister snapped. What the hell are you doing here? You're not allowed to be near him. His brother was already pulling out his phone. Calling the cops. My husband gripped my hands tighter. I don't want to be here, he begged. His voice broke. Please take me home. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was confused. Scared. But in that moment, he knew who I was. He wasn't lost, not completely. And I wasn't about to let him go. I turned to his family. If you call the cops, I said, keeping my voice calm, I'll tell them exactly what you're doing. That you're abandoning him in a care home while you drain his bank accounts. You really think they won't look into it? His brother froze. His sister hesitated. I pressed on. He just said it. He doesn't want to be here. If you try to force him, that's elder abuse. And trust me, I have enough evidence on you already. They knew I wasn't bluffing. His sister gritted her teeth, her face red with fury. You can't take care of him. You don't even have a house. I felt my husband squeeze my hand again. And then he whispered, we have a house. It's our house. I turned back to his family and I smiled. You heard him. They knew they lost. For the first time, they had no control. But this fight wasn't over yet. Because I had just gotten my husband back. And now, I was going to take back everything else. The breaking point. We stood in the parking lot of that godforsaken care home, the air thick with tension. My husband clung to my arm, his grip weak but deliberate. His eyes darted around, confused, scared, but aware. His family? They were fuming. His sister looked ready to lunge at me. His brother, still clutching his phone, hesitated, torn between calling the police or cutting his losses. I had them trapped. And they knew it. This isn't over, his sister spat. You don't even have a place to take him. She thought she had me. Thought I'd stammer, hesitate, maybe even admit defeat. But I smiled. Because what she didn't know was that I had spent the last few weeks fighting behind the scenes. Exposing the truth, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers. Legal documents. Actually, it is over, I said, keeping my voice calm. Because I just got a court order freezing his assets until an investigation is completed. Their faces drained of color. What? His brother choked out. I told you, I said, taking a step closer. I've been gathering evidence. Bank records. Transfers. Conversations. Everything you've done to manipulate him. I handed the documents to my husband, guiding his trembling hands over them. His eyes skimmed the words, his brows furrowing as if something deep inside was trying to surface. And then, he gasped. This is my money? His voice cracked. You took my money? His sister snapped. Oh, don't act so surprised. You don't even know what year it is half the time. The parking lot went silent. Even her brother turned to stare at her, horrified. I saw my husband's lip tremble. And then, he started to cry. Not big, dramatic sobs, just quiet, heartbreaking tears that slipped down his wrinkled cheeks. I had spent months mourning him, grieving the man I had lost. But in that moment, I saw him. The man I had built a life with. The man I had loved for over 30 years. And he knew. He knew what they had done to him. To us. The confrontation, I trusted you, he whispered, looking straight at his sister. You told me she was bad. That I was better off without her. His sister's face hardened. We did what we had to do. You don't even remember most days. You're not competent enough to make these decisions. That did it. His entire body shook with rage. I may forget things, he snapped, his voice suddenly stronger than I had heard in years, but I know one thing for sure, she is my wife. His sister tried to backtrack. We were just trying to rob me blind, he cut in, his voice rising. Trying to dump me in this prison while you spent my money? For the first time in months, my husband wasn't a confused shell of himself. He was furious. His sister turned to me, desperate now. You can't take care of him, she cried. You think love is enough? You think he won't wake up tomorrow and forget all this? Forget you. My stomach twisted. Because, deep down, I knew she was right. Tomorrow, he might not remember what they had done. He might not even remember this conversation. But I refused to let them control him another second. He might forget, I said softly. But I won't. The aftermath, his brother and sister knew they were finished. Between the investigation, the frozen assets, and now my husband's refusal to go into that care home, they had nothing left to stand on. So they did what cowards always do. They ran. His sister stormed off, her face red with fury, cursing under her breath. His brother followed, silent, his eyes darting between us and the papers in my husband's hands. And just like that, they were gone. Coming home, the drive back was quiet. My husband sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I wondered if he even understood what had just happened. But as we pulled up to Anna's house, the only home we had left, he turned to me. You saved me. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to hold back my emotions. I just did what I had to do. He reached for my hand. His fingers were frail, shaking, but familiar. For a moment, it was like old times. Like we were just another couple on a quiet drive home. Then, his grip loosened. His gaze drifted. And just like that, the recognition in his eyes was gone. The final goodbye, it didn't happen all at once. Some days, he would remember me in bits and pieces. Other days, I was just that nice lady who took care of him. But over time, the man I knew faded completely. Until, one morning, I walked into his room, and he looked at me like I was nobody. Who are you? He asked. And that's when I knew. I had lost him. Not in the dramatic way his family had tried to steal him from me. Not in a legal battle. But in the quiet, merciless way dementia takes the people we love. Closure, his family never came back. The legal case dragged on, but in the end, they lost everything they stole. His money was put into a trust, for his care, not their greed. I stayed by his side, even when he didn't know me. Because that's what love is. Not just the big fights, the proving yourself, the winning. It's the quiet moments. The sitting in the dark, the holding hands even when one of you doesn't remember why. It's staying, even when it hurts. And when the day came that I had to say goodbye for the last time, I didn't cry. I had already lost him long before then. But I had fought for him. And I knew, wherever he was now, he knew that too. The end.